Welcome to another episode of The Good Listening To Show, your life and times with me, Chris Grimes. The storytelling show that features The Clearing, where all good questions come to get asked and all good stories come to be told. And where all my guests have two things in common. They're all creative individuals and all with an interesting story to tell. There are some lovely storytelling metaphors, a clearing, a tree, a juicy storytelling exercise called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, some alchemy, some gold, a cheeky bit of Shakespeare, and a cake. So it's all to play for. So yes, welcome to The Good Listening To Show, your life and times with me, Chris Grimes. Are you sitting comfortably? Then we shall begin.
58.
Look at that. We're laughing from the get-go. So it's a great privilege to welcome to the Good Listening To podcast, Clearing today, a man who I can only describe as being a beautiful lyrical man. I've been really enjoying researching up to today to bring the lovely Paul Dodgson here into the Good Listening To podcast, Clearing. He's written a wonderful book, very lyrical of itself. And some of the songs I've been listening to, Poppy's song, by the way, is just a perfect song, I think. And I hope you'll tell us a bit about that. But the Good Listening To podcast is the place where all good stories come to be told and all good questions come to be asked. And I'm the, I suppose, author and curator of this very exciting, energetic space called The Clearing. And so Paul Dodgson, who is a writer, a life writer. When I read that, I thought that's quite interesting because when you think of life art is whether or not we do it naked or not. I'm sure you don't always feel the need to write naked, but I'm sure you have.
We'll
so
go
yes,
into that later, yeah.
So yes, you're really welcome, and you're beautifully lyrical. I just want to share with you some of the lyrics later on that I saw that really caught my heart in working up to bringing you into the place today. But anyway, Paul Dodgson, welcome. How are you? What's your story of the day?
So thank you very much indeed. It's lovely to be here. And I suppose if I'm thinking of my story of the day, it is actually, do you know what it is? It's the story of the day is I was thinking about when we first met.
Okay.
And I bet you don't remember. Can you remember when we first met?
Well, you've been on my awareness radar for many, many years. And we have many people in common. We've got Kate Cross, who
Yes.
I met way back when at the beginning of my career. And in fact, even this morning, reading about that as I was flicking through your book, it reminded me that there's another actor that has just recently said yes, and he was around about the same time. There's all these connections. It's an actor called Colin Hurley, but anyway, there are lots of connections. But I think I've known you for about 20 years.
You have, yeah. It's actually longer than that. And in fact, I looked it up because I can remember the occasion. We were both auditioned for a radio production of Cider with Rosie.
Wow.
In 1998 in the same room by a producer called Viv Beebe,
Yes.
who produced and directed that series. And we were both asked to read for the same part. We both ended up in it because I've just looked this up. And
Yeah.
I played the vicar, and I think you played various other parts.
Yes.
And interestingly, this was 1998, and it's about to be repeated on Radio 4 Extra in March. Yeah.
And Viv Beebe is that other connection because you subsequently went on to produce Poetry Please, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yes, that's right. I was a producer there anyway, and I started to. I'd sort of begun acting, and then ended up producing, and so I was kind of creeping back into acting again.
Okay, I like that expression, creeping back. And by the way, what's so wonderful about your book, On the Road Not Taken, obviously it has resonances of, I'm assuming, the road less travelled might be where you're going slightly, but I so love. Have you heard of something called desire lines, by the way?
No, I haven't.
If you're on the beaten path of something, how often people will go off-piste and there'll be a brand new track, which the architect of whichever space weren't expecting, which are called desire lines, where you think, oh, do you know what? I'd rather go this way. And desire lines are a really nice path. So what's lovely about your book is that I was really struck with the fact there's a journey to authenticity, how you delayed coming to the clearing, if you like, of what you really wanted to do by almost 40 years.
Yes.
But as we know, your desire lines to have gone somewhere else are not a waste of life. They're just different choices. So it's really profound because of all the notions of sliding door moments in our life. And even in your book, you tell a beautiful story about a moment when you're about to, in a hotel in New York, go to bed. But instead, as the lift is about to open, you clock somebody who raises a glass to you in a bar. And then, maybe you're going to tell us about this, but that results in a most spontaneous and beautiful evening.
Yes. And I end up singing Fairy Tale of New York in a bar in Greenwich Village.
Yes. So listen, there's lots to talk about, but I really want you to just take this wherever you want to. So I'm going to take you through the normal route map, as I've started to discover is the best way to do this. So we'll talk about a clearing first of all, then we'll talk about the tree within your clearing. We'll shake your tree. There'll be alchemy, gold, and then there'll be a cake with a cherry on the top as well at the end. So if people don't have a reference to you, I know there's a clue to you because you often walk with a guitar over your shoulder.
Yes.
Even your book has that, if I show it up to the screen as well, that lovely sort of quintessential musician iconography. So if people don't have reference for you, but they just meet you, like this chap in the hotel lobby in New York might meet you. When people ask you that rather clunky question, hello, you look interesting, what do you do? What's your favourite way of answering that?
Well, probably the most accurate thing I could say would be a story engineer. But that's not really an accepted profession yet. But by that I mean I kind of work on stories, and I have done throughout my professional life as a radio producer, as a teacher, as a script writing and writing mentor, and as a writer myself of scripts, of screenplays, and now this book. So all and of course music in the form of songs, both in the theatre and also in songs that I just write for myself and put out into the world. So it's all of those things. And if I wanted to find an umbrella term, I think it would be story engineer.
That's so beautifully put. I've never heard anyone, it makes such profound sense. And I've never heard anyone say it like that. So, you should copyright that. You are a story engineer. I just adore that. That's wonderful. And indeed, again, your book, please talk about it as much as you want.
Yes.
It's full of, it's brilliant to flick through, by the way. I've just found all sorts of magical moments. So anyway, that is now time to bring you into a place called the clearing. So what is a clearing like for you? So where do you go, Paul Dodgson, to get clutter-free, innovative and able to think?
Well, I think to start with, I would say I am very cluttered. I'm naturally very cluttered. As I'm talking to you now, and I'm trying to talk in a straight line about the clearing, there are 100 other things coming in, and I could so easily digress and talk about something else completely and actually not tell a very well engineered story at all. And that is the way my mind is. And so I find it very difficult to concentrate. I always have done. It became apparent round about A-level time when you start needing to concentrate for long periods of time. I found it difficult. I did a degree. I found that difficult. I'm amazed I've ever done anything at all. But,
but you've done many things.
I have ended up doing a lot of different things. Yeah, a jack of all trades. But what the clearing is for me now, I have discovered, is running. I run, and when I get up in the morning, my mind is all over the place. I'm a mess of half-constructed thoughts, and I go running 6 days a week. I go out and I force myself out. So my mind is saying, don't bother, stay at home, pour yourself a cup of coffee, just go upstairs, just have a little look on the internet. And I have to force myself out of the door, and I run. And within half an hour, I'm out of the woods and I'm in the clearing. And it's just the most wonderful thing. And it stays with me to a certain extent all day.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Beautiful stuff. I also, have you heard that expression, life is a wicked mess? I love the fact that as a story engineer, your head is just full of clutter, but running gets it out of your head and into it.
It is amazing. And how I discovered this was, occasionally I'd run, and in my 30s, I think, and I'd feel afterwards, I'd feel profoundly different. And I think that's interesting. And then there was a point where I read a review of a book called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running by the Japanese novelist Haruki Murakami. And he wrote this quite slim little memoir, really, about running and writing and the connection between the two, and how writing a novel or a long book is like running a marathon. And when I read this book, it just made sense. Now, the interesting thing was that the review that I read, it was in the Independent newspaper, and it was written by Alistair Campbell, the Tony Blair's director of communications and spin doctor in chief. And he had suffered, I think he certainly, I have suffered from depression at various points in my life, and he has too. And I know that running is part of his strategy. And it kind of all made sense. And I remember I was working at Salisbury Playhouse just after as I was reading this book, and I was it was a tech week in a theatre. And I was involved in from 10 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, not moving very much. And so instead of just getting up, having breakfast and going in, I'd go out for a run every day that week, first of all around the water meadows. And the difference was so profound, I couldn't believe it. And I didn't start running every day at that point. It kind of took a little while to get to that stage. And but the effect is profound, and it's and extraordinary, and it settles everything down. And then some years later, I was running an event at a literary festival down in Cornwall, in a little Cornish village, and I got up early in the morning, and I thought I would go for a run before my event. And there was a man in the distance I could see. I didn't know where I was, a very hilly place by the coast. And so I thought I'd follow this man. And so I followed him, and he went out through the lanes and round and back. And as I drew back into the town, I caught up with him, and it was Alistair Campbell who was so down speaking. So I was able to say to him, "I'm running because of you."
Good grief. And by the way, as you were speaking about Alistair Campbell, I remember about, I read about his depression and how he would, in your monsters of distraction, getting you to go upstairs or have another coffee rather than running. I remember a story about him walking down a corridor in his house, wherever it was, and his instinctive decision to open his curtains or not would inform him subliminally about whether his depression, if he was feeling dark, was going to take over. If he could just open the curtains, it means that he was in the day.
Yes.
But that's so extraordinary that he is your inspirer, and then you find yourself running alongside him. Yeah, amazing. And the chaos that you've experienced in your mind, it sounds to me, as a story engineer, you've got lots of desire lines going on in your head, is what I think. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was young, when I was at school and people would say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I could never settle on any one thing. And so what actually has happened is that I haven't settled on one thing. It's lots of different things, but there is a common root. But that works best for me. And at the point you are in your life now, when you look back, that beauty of the gift of hindsight, can you see the golden thread that's weaved, albeit a sort of a big snaking of a narrative, but can you see the sort of ley lines towards now that all make sense? Yeah, I can. It does make sense. It does make sense. And I'll probably talk a little bit more about that as we go on, actually. Sure. So we're running, and if I may, I'm going to run alongside you now. Run alongside me. While you're talking, can I pour a coffee? Please do. So you're running along, and I'm there with you now, and I've arrived with a tree. So it's quite difficult to up with you as I sort of heft after you with the tree. And we're going to shake your tree in the clearing to see which storytelling apples fall out. Yes. Now, this is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise where you've had about 5 minutes or as long as you needed, Paul Dodgson, to think about 4 things that have shaped you, 3 things that inspire you, two things that never fail to grab your attention, a bit, squirrels, a bit like that borrowed from the Up reference there. And then one quirky or unusual fact about you we couldn't possibly know until you tell us. So it's just to get you on the open road of desire lines of stories you'd like to tell with the thread of that as your stimulus. So go wherever you like within the structure of me shaking your tree to see which apples fall out.
Okay. Well, I think it's interesting. I automatically want to head towards a kind of chronological narrative within the four things. So I will do that. And I'm going to start with home. Home for me was a house in Kent, a modest detached house in a place called Hythe, which is a little town on the coast of Kent. And it's slightly unusual. I was an only child, and I had a slightly unusual childhood in that my parents never moved. So that's the first house that I can remember. And the house was eventually sold when my mum moved into a care home 2 years ago. Oh, so in all that time, this place has been there.
As a constant.
As a constant.
Yeah,
and so whenever somebody says to you, wherever you are in the world, and somebody says, hey, where's home? My thought would always be Hythe, this little house in Hythe in Kent. And it was a lovely place to grow up. And I often think when I watch documentaries about the 1970s, there's usually kind of bleak bomb sites, still strangely often in black and white, but strange kind of almost apocalyptic landscapes of decay. And it just wasn't like that in Hythe. It was a nice, genteel little town on the coast, looking out across the sea to France. And that's where I grew up, and it nurtured me and supported me, as did mum and dad. But at the same time, it was a very organized place. So I think of my parents, to use a metaphor, I think that my parents' life was like an organized tour, they knew where they were staying. They knew how they were going to get there, and they knew what they were going to eat on the whole when they got there. It was all sorted out, and it was very organized, and it functioned really well for them. And I think I sort of reacted against that. And I feel like, to continue the metaphor, I've been backpacking. I've had a kind of one-way ticket, and I've spent a lot of time sleeping in ferry ports and railway stations, metaphorically.
And were you tempted in the constancy after your mum passed away? Were you tempted to take the house on, or you knew that was just the end of an era?
Well, my mum hasn't passed away. She's in a care home.
Sorry.
So, yeah,
sorry.
No, my father has, but my mum is in a care home now.
Right.
And so in order to pay the care home, to support the care home fees, we had to sell the house.
Okay.
I wouldn't have been tempted, though, because I've left there now. I live in Cardiff now, and
right.
That's my home. And it's not that's the past. It was a sad thing. It was a strange and sad thing to see it go. And the last week, I may well write about that in the future, actually, about the last week in the house, because it was a strange thing as I went through the archaeology of my parents' possessions and had to throw almost everything away. And just.
Do you mind me asking how long ago your father passed away?
Yeah, that was in 2001. So that's nearly 20 years ago. Mm.
Okay.
And so that was that. So I think that in terms of shaping, the stability of it, kind of, and safety of it, gave me something to react against, and gave me possibly the confidence to be less so in my own life. And maybe that moves on to the next thing, because that's where you
sure.
Which I wanted to talk about the. Actually, no, I want to keep the chronology, so I'm going to stick with the chronology. I'm going to talk about the BBC. The BBC. Lovely. Okay, I got a job in 1986, so I did a degree in drama, theatre, and television studies, and I got very interested in sound recording when I was there.
And where was that, Paul?
Where was that, or
yes,
when?
That you did your degree?
It was in a place called King Alfred's College in Winchester, which is now the University of Winchester. It's been upgraded. So it depends who you're talking to. People say, where did you go to? And you might say, well, University of Winchester, or you might say King Alfred's College.
Okay. I like the historic. King Alfred sounds more historic.
It was a teacher training college originally, and it expanded into a liberal arts college in the 70s, actually, and started doing these other degrees. And we had amazing, it was an amazing place. There was a TV studio there, and it was before there were any, portable video cameras and things. They would have these things called porta packs that you could sign out. And
I remember, yes.
You remember those things? Great big things that you would
hefty
thing that you'd have over your shoulder with a wire that connected to a camera that you'd put on your shoulder, and you go wandering around with that with very limited battery life.
And forgive me for sidetracking you slightly, but you said you got a job seminally at the BBC.
Yes, and then I got a job at the BBC. I got a job as a studio manager initially at the BBC. They used to have a training scheme for people to come into the BBC, and it was a way of getting in. It was quite I studied the odds and worked out how I could get this job, and I realized that I applied for it while I was still at college and didn't get in, but I had the experience of going for a board, and I sort of realized all the ingredients that I needed. And so over the next year, actually spent time learning enough physics so I could confidently say how a microphone works.
Yes.
Understanding current affairs enough to be able to know what the major stories were, to be able to listen to enough radio drama to understand how it was made.
Yes.
And just learn about things so that when they said to me, tell me what's the most important story today, I could say, I know. It's and then when they said in the interview, tell me about how does magnetic tape actually work?
And you knew.
I knew all these things, and I got in, as a trainee studio manager, and it was a great training. And I ended up I did a little bit of time at Broadcasting House, but I then ended up at the World Service. And I think now of my time at the BBC, because I was initially a studio manager and then a producer at the BBC from between 1986 to 2001. And I think of that as actually my university. It was the University of the BBC. And I learnt so much through my encounters with the people that I met. And so initially in the World Service in those days was primarily broadcasting on shortwave all around the world. And there were 36, I think, different language services. And you would be given your job would be to turn up 15 minutes before a transmission, and for a very kind of harried and frustrated and chaotic presenter to come running in with tapes and records and scripts in Pashto maybe, or Mandarin or Russian.
Yes.
And they'd hand it all to you, and you'd have 15 minutes to kind of make sense of it, get it on air. And
how could you do that if it's all coming at you in sort of multilinguistic packages of information?
Well, most scripts you can follow. Mandarin and Russian are harder, but most others are. And even after a while, you began to get the sense of pace of scripts in Russian and Mandarin. Wow. You didn't know what was going on. But and then there would be hand signals. So you just needed to know that it was that tape 1, band 1 was first, and then tape 2, band 1 was next. And as long as everything was in the right order, they would be reading, and then they would go like that, and you would play in the tape. and if it was the right one, it all was good. If it was the wrong one, they'd kind of go like that, and you did.
So the power of body language to read
Yes.
whether or not you're being a good producer. I love that.
And then it but these people were amazing, and they were often very often had escaped difficult regimes in their home countries to end up in the UK and become broadcasters. And so they were all really interesting people. And so I ended up learning so much about the world. And so I do think of it as the university of the BBC. And then I became a producer initially for the pop music unit, it was called in the World Service.
Pop music unit.
Pop music unit. And the pop music unit had various programs that were made every week, including people like Dave Lee Travis, who would come in, the Radio 1 DJ, and do something. But amongst these were there was a youth program for youth called Megamix, and I got to produce this, and it was a magazine program. And one of the first things they did when I started there was to say, look, what you need to do, what we want is a live broadcast from New York. So you've got to go out and do that. And so that was the first sort of foreign trip I had. And it was the most amazing thing to sort of be, having watched New York on screen and read about it all my life, to then suddenly go there and have this ticket to kind of get you into places.
Yes. And
the BBC in those days had an office, had a suite of offices and studios high up in the Rockefeller Center in Manhattan. And
how lovely.
You'd walk in through the door and there'd be this sort of Manhattan skyscape behind you, and you'd really feel like you were something.
Being from the UK as well, and the sort of love the American stereotypically have of the British, I'm from the BBC, and then you're in Manhattan. That's fantastic.
It was interesting, yeah. But then to bring it down to earth, we put this program together, and it went out live, and it was a fairly amazing experience. And it was, you knew that a phenomenal amount of people were listening to it, millions of people around the world on shortwave in Nigeria and in Russia and in all over the place would be crouched around these little shortwave radios listening to you, partly because they would write to us and tell us. And anyway, we finished this program and we were on a real high, and we went down to a cocktail bar over the road. It was a Monday night and it was completely empty. And the presenter went up to the bar and said, we want to have 2 cocktails because we've just broadcast to 50 million people. And the barman just kind of looked at us and says, is that so?
What more need he say? Just right. Yes, and brilliant. And you're so enabling other people's work during all this time. And I know because of the book On the Road Not Taken, somewhere in your narrative, you're also wanting to be a musician. That's sort of something.
Yes, absolutely.
Out to do.
Yeah. So the thing about being a producer is, and I was a producer in the World Service, and then I came to Bristol to work on a program there. That's what brought me to Bristol in 1991 to work I ended up working on various programs, drama, documentaries, literary programs, all kinds of things. And what you're doing is enabling somebody else's creativity, essentially.
Yes.
And often what I would find is, particularly working with quite well-known people, and making one-off programs with them, documentary type programs, creative documentaries, that they would be very chaotic and would be firing off all over the place. And your job would be to rein it in and to make a story out of this chaos. Mm-hmm. And I'd been doing this for quite a long time, and I just wanted to do it myself. And so, eventually I did. And
there's a delicious irony in that as well, because at the very beginning you were talking about how you feel that you're very chaotic within your own mindscape.
Yes.
In a good way. So very creative and lots of desire lines firing off different places and tangents. And yet you then had to make a job out of trying to contain other people's chaos or creativity.
Yeah, it is. It's true. It is true. And I think I'm quite good at just going to work, actually, and having a job to do. I think I'm quite good at that. I think it's particularly when I'm on my own that everything comes shooting in. I'm quite good when in the good old days when we used to catch trains to go to places, and
Yes.
I'd have an hour on the train. I could actually say, I've got an hour on the train. That gives me enough time to write the notes on this script.
Yes, to gather your thoughts.
Gather my thoughts, or just to actually do a piece of work.
Your train of thought. See what I did there? You're on a train.
But I did leave, and I will come to that. But the other thing I wanted to talk about that shaped me was the death of my father, which happened in 2001. And he had, my dad was amazing. He left school. I'm not entirely sure when he left school. I think it was 14, but I'm not sure whether school leaving age hadn't gone up at that stage. So I need to research that. But he left school very young. Maybe it was 15. And he went out to work. And he also started smoking. And he smoked throughout his life. And he was amazing. He was an engineer of things, tool maker actually. And he would work with, and he gradually became more and more successful within the company he was working for. He was promoted, and he got higher up in the company, and he ended up as a company director. I discovered that he was actually going to night school right into his 30s to get qualifications. So, it's a very, very different world to the one that I grew up in. And he was always the voice of reason, and I could always phone him up. And I can remember when I said to him, I wanted to be a writer, he said, yes, but what are you going to write? And that was him. He could, if he had a decision to make, he could write a list of the advantages and the disadvantages, and he could make a decision based on the list, because it would be
based on logic and constancy. Because you said they were very still in their life and very pragmatic and planned.
Yes.
You mentioned they always knew what to eat, so very regimented in a way.
Yeah. And he was very logical and liked things that were logical and understood them. But he had smoked, and he smoked. Yeah, I think he didn't stop until he was about 65. So by the time, it perhaps wasn't a surprise when one day there was a phone call to say that there'd been he'd had an X-ray and there was a shadow on his lung, and he had lung cancer, and he was operated on, but it was slightly too late, and he died. So within quite a short space of time, he'd been part of us. He'd been in my house in the outside Bristol, where I was living at the time, putting up a climbing frame for my daughter, to not being there anymore. Yes. And, and that did have a really profound effect, because I think we were very lucky in that, I as I say, I'm an only child, so I didn't have brothers or sisters. And there was a fairly sort of modest family group, but we went through my childhood right up to 2001 without any of that direct group having any sort of tragedy.
Okay. Yes.
Then my father died. And then within 10 years, that whole with the exception of my mum, everybody had gone from that generation. So,
and how old were you in 2001? Because it's a really interesting moment of I suppose, having to be a grown-up from 2001, probably, even though you're a parent at the time as well.
Well, I was 38. I felt I was just 39. I was at 39 2 days before he died.
Uh-huh.
And so it was a very strange time. And it's no surprise now when I look back on it that within a year I'd left my job. My marriage to the mother of my Poppy and Fred, my children, had ended. I'd also been through another kind of episode of depression, and I'd gone hurtling down another road. It's not a surprise, and I think it does. It had a profound effect, and that's why it's something that came into my mind immediately as something that shaped me.
And on chapter 1 of On the Road Not Taken, you do go straight to there. It's almost like that's the beginning moment. I know you play with the timeline beautifully within the book, and there's moments and chapters about 1976 and blah, blah, blah. But 2001 is where you start, isn't it? I believe with your
it is, yeah.
Into your
yes,
with your father, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're still in the clearing, and we're talking about the things that have shaped you. So I think it's the fourth thing now that's shaped you.
So the fourth thing that shaped me is singing again. So I stopped singing when I was, I think, about 19 years old. I think I worked it out that I stopped singing in public, or singing songs in public, I should say. I didn't stop singing altogether. I just stopped singing songs in public. And I wanted to sing ever since. I wanted to sing. I would go to parties where people would sing and I would want to sing. I would stand and watch bands on stage and I would want to be standing there too, singing. And I didn't. And the longer I left it, the harder it became to actually sing. And I wrote songs I've written songs for other singers to sing that have, ended up on records. I've written a lot for of lyrics and music for theatrical productions, and I would kind of apologize for my voice and say, this is the song, and croak it out to the actors and be apologetic. And I never actually had the confidence to stand and sing myself. And partly I think that songs are a way of explaining the world. It's songs I particularly love, and I think they are a way of explaining the world. And for me, it's a wonderful way of understanding things is through songs and music. And I wanted to be, as well as being on the receiving end of that, I wanted to be giving it out, and I wasn't. And I always thought I'd do it tomorrow. I thought, that's fine, I'll do it tomorrow. I'd been in bands when I was young. We'd had a lovely kind of life in Kent with our band, the Entangled Network, and we got to the point where we split up when I had to do my A-levels, and I hadn't found my way back to actually performing live again.
And what do you attribute the sort of cork being put in your sort of genie gift of singing? Because I'm so happy that you have decided to, as you say,
yeah,
you're not just croaking it out. Your songs are incredibly lyrical. And because of your wisdom of your life's journey to now, they immediately, go straight to an emotional core, which is, very, very profound. Anyway, so what do you attribute the corking to, do you think?
The corking was, I think it was a sense of needing to be really good. Of as soon as I performed in front of anybody, needing to be perfect. And of course you're not perfect when you begin. You have to learn how to stand on stage and sing to people. For many performers, sometimes I talk to performers about this book and they say, they just don't, they say, well, why? It's just what you do. And I say, well, it's for a lot of people, it just isn't what you do. Yes. And it's a profoundly different thing. And you feel very exposed. There's something about your singing voice as opposed to your speaking voice that's very revealing. And I think, it's almost like suddenly you're naked in front of people, when you had all your clothes on beforehand.
It's the creative endeavor and the sort of exposure that really truly is, because you've got to step into the sunlight of judgment, I think sometimes we can feel.
Yes.
And yet,
I put the cork in, and the thing, I think, I would sometimes be embarrassed about singing, and the embarrassment would result in a kind of momentary tone deafness, which would mean I'd start singing a line and it would be way off key and everybody would laugh, And what I didn't realize for a long time was that you just have to learn it. You can just learn it and then you can sing in tune. It's just a matter of practice.
Yes.
I sort of thought you either had it or you didn't. And there was this sense that you either had a good voice or you didn't have a good voice. And once I decided that I didn't have a good voice, the cork went in the bottle.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
And of course, the delicious irony is that as long as one is being authentic, your voice is always just perfect because it's authentically coming from
that's right. Yes.
truth. A bit like an actor's choice and the choices that they make. And by the way, just one of the lyrics I just loved, and I've only found this yesterday, but the sky's a mess of contrails, but there's music in the air.
Oh,
and I just love that. And every time I tune into your lyrics, I'm just thinking, wow, I'm so happy that you've decided to be the lyricist. You've written numerous plays. I know you are a lyricist for others, but it's great you brought it back home. Yeah. So you're standing in the clearing with your own guitar now.
Well, the lovely thing is about music that they don't, it's not, the lovely thing is about songs that they're not there. Nothing's there. And sometimes you have to go to work at it. Jason Isbell, the American singer-songwriter, says, plumbers don't get plumber's block.
I love that. They're ballcock stuck or something.
Exactly, yeah. That you have to go to work at writing songs. And I agree with that. You do. But sometimes there's some sort of impulse that comes along. There's something that starts the process off. And there's been nothing there. And then you work at it, and sometimes it just comes, but usually it's kind of like a sculpture. It's like making a sculpture out of a piece of wood. You're kind of chipping away at it, and then eventually it's there, and then it's there, and you can carry it around with you, and you can take it out as I've done to Berlin, and you can sing it in a bar in Berlin at 2:00 in the morning, and you can take it to the Scilly Isles and sing it there, and you can take it up to somebody's living room in Yorkshire, and you can sing it there. And this thing travels around with you, this little universe that you've made. And it's a really satisfying.
It's a lovely full circle in the fact that back in the producer days, people just give you sort of tones of Mandarin, and yet you can make it go into the world by, I'll broadcast that then. So there is a way of just, the transferable currency of music being, the currency of all culture. Everyone can all relate to music. It either resonates or it doesn't, and we can all relate to it.
And I think the extraordinary thing is that I probably did start this process thinking, well, maybe I'll be standing up there with Bruce Springsteen, on Wembley Stadium stage, somewhere far back in my mind, and then in a pub in Bristol on Friday night when I was supporting on a rainy Friday night when I was supporting Kid Carpet and somebody else. I was at the bottom of the bill, and I'm sort of standing there, and there's half a dozen people sitting watching me, and more and more people arriving and talking in the background. You realize actually that's not going to happen. You've got a long way to go, but there are those 6 people sitting there watching you, and that's the thing.
It's connection.
To focus on.
And it's totally relatable, by the way, because in my world of comedy improvisation, there've been times when I'm performing to like a tortoise and a stoat, it feels in the middle of nowhere, and then other times there's potentially if in a different setting there could be hundreds of people there. And
it is exactly, yes, and you but I would say probably for me it's more often the fewer than the tortoise than the hundreds, but they are still there, and you have to and what I've had to do is to sort of redefine the idea of success.
Absolutely. Yes, it's totally relative. It's all about, that's again beautifully relatable. Absolutely.
And what is wonderful is that so I made a record, and the record the record includes a song that I wrote for my daughter when she left home, and
it's a Poppy song, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was a sort of manifesto, my little sort of manifesto for her to take out into the world. And what is amazing is that song has been playlisted on Spotify. So the way kind of music grows now is it used to be radio play used to be the thing, and now it's Spotify playlists as well are really important. And it's a song that has found its way on to playlists all around the world, and has been. And as I speak, it's just approaching something like 27,000 listens.
Congratulations! And if I may, I think it is a perfect song, and it doesn't surprise me it's on a playlist. Anyone who has my daughter's 21, has recently gone to university. Anyone who can relate to the fact their child is about to step into the world, wherever you may roam, this will always be a home for you, is just so beautiful. And I love the fact that Poppy in the song also has her own graffiti tag, "Know that you're alive." And I now know that I've walked past that.
Have you?
In Bristol a lot, and I'm going to go looking for it again. But it is a beautiful song, Poppy song.
So, yeah, so thank you. So
there's a light at my window, and wherever you may roam. And it's yours. So you tell us the lyric.
Just to explain why that you have seen that as a graffiti tag is that I asked Poppy to make the video for the song, and so I just said, can you go and make the video for the song and edit it and bring it back to me, because I quite like not appearing in them, you see, and because I can do that. That's the other thing. I don't have to, because it's, I'm at this stage in my life, and so she went and filmed this, and there's this lyric in it, "Know that you're alive," and if I could tell you just one thing, it's to know that you're alive. And she went and put that in various places around the city, and filmed herself painting it on bridges and various things. Where there's
I recognise a lot of the infrastructure of where she's put them, and I'm going to go looking to see if it's still there.
If it's still there, yeah, because that was in 2019, I think. So it'd be interesting to see whether somebody's come along and put it over the top.
And she's very, very talented in her filmmaking as well. And I know your son, Fred, is also a musician now as well. So yeah. I think whatever you're doing as a parent too, you're really encouraging them to follow their creative and artistic bliss.
Well, of course, we talking of parenting, I mean, I've been at a distance from them throughout their life, because when Fred was quite young, I split up with their mum, and so we would spend a lot of time together, but a lot of credit must go to Poppy and Fred's mum, I have to say.
How wonderfully generous of you. But what's so clear is your own profound connection. Because as I say, Poppy's song, for me, is just a perfect song. I just thought, wow. And I felt, I was saying to Janie, my wife, over breakfast, actually, in the time I've been researching this, I've developed, if I may, a bit of a man crush for you. I think it's so good. Because you're like a gentle Bob Dylan in what it is you sound like, and you probably don't want to be boxed at all. But it's incredibly lyrical with just beautiful lyrics within there. There's also something about diamonds of Brislington, diamonds at my feet.
Brislington Diamonds, yeah. Well, that's there's a song called Brislington Diamonds, and that was just a phrase that there is some connection with Richard Coles, the Reverend Richard Coles, who I'm not sure what I believe a friend of mine was producing a program with Richard Coles, and I think what happened was they were walking along the road, and there was some broken glass on the pavement in Bristol, and apparently he looked down and pointed at it and said, "Brislington Diamonds." Out of broken glass from a car window.
Do you know what's so extraordinary in 5 Degrees of Separation? I thought about the Reverend Richard Coles this morning, thinking, gosh, I'd really like to be able to sort of send him the podcast just to see what he thinks about it. But it's just so extraordinary that Brislington Diamonds, that story. But also...
Yeah. I don't know whether I remember that, but I don't know whether I've remembered it correctly, but that's where it came from, the memory of that. And I love
that broken glass in Brislington, because also I made a dark comic short film called Knock Knock, which was set in Brislington.
Do you know, I've seen that. Yes, that's right. That's great.
Yankee.
Yes.
Yes. Anyway, but that was someone almost crunching, as you say, through the Brislington diamonds to go and get their fix of the day, which is what the film is about in a sort of quirky way. Anyway, I love that. Beautiful stuff. And so now I think we've come to the 4 things that have shaped you.
Yes.
And now it's 3 things that inspire you.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to talk first of all about Laurie Lee, and I'm going to use Laurie Lee as a gateway into life writing. Not so much. I've talked quite a lot about myself and life writing, so I'm going to talk about the value of life writing, because I think it has immense value in the world. Laurie Lee, poet and memoirist, who indeed wrote Cider with Rosie.
Yes, he did.
The adaptation that we were both in 1998.
By the way, I know by heart the opening of the book Cider with Rosie, because it struck me in a similar way. So I'm really intrigued to know.
both, I think the opening of Cider with Rosie and also the next one, which was the next book he wrote, which was As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning, that describes him leaving his home in the Cotswolds and walking initially to Southampton because he'd never seen the sea, then going back to London and working as a labourer in London for 18 months or so, and then travelling across Spain with a violin on his back, and eventually getting caught up in the Spanish Civil War and being rescued from the beaches by the Royal Navy in the 1930s. I think he leaves in 1934. And both of those books, the first 2 pages, I think are perfect examples of how to tell life story, because they are full of movement, sensory detail, of showing, not telling, and yet at the same time are full of the context that you need to understand the bigger story.
Beautifully put, by the way. I completely agree with all of that.
And Laurie Lee is, when I read, particularly As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning, which deals with him as he's 19 when he left home. So he's sort of 19, 20, 21 as he's moving across Spain. Some of the attitudes to race and objectification of women, are very much of products of another age. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, the way he writes, the way he describes things is extraordinary. And he then went on to write a little essay about what he called autobiography, and life writing, memoir, autobiography are kind of interchangeable terms. And there is a sentence in this essay, which I keep on my wall, so I'm going to look up and find it now, which I think explains why it's so important. Autobiography can be the laying to rest of ghosts as well as an ordering of the mind. But for me, it is also a celebration of living and an attempt to hoard its sensations.
Wow. And, to this day, I still use the first paragraph of Cider with Rosie. I was set down from the carrier's cart at the age of 3.
Yeah.
I use that to get people to use texture and colour in their voice, because it's so sense-evoking and full of insects jumping about and, just taste of berries. It's just beautiful.
And I use it in life writing classes. So I teach. So I suppose I'm going on to say that that I believe that life writing is a wonderful thing, and I believe it's a wonderful thing not just for lords and ladies, kings and queens. It is something for everybody. That everybody has everybody's life is an extraordinary thing and is worth documenting.
Yes, humanity binds us all, and our story therein. Yes.
And one thing I put a little by. I received a book the other day called this. It's called North Facing Late Flowering, and it's by a man called Graham Clift, who I had the pleasure of mentoring just a few sessions over a few years. Not any great time. And he has just published his memoir, and in the beginning, he says that. Talks about a gap down which working class lives are lost to history. They're left off the corporate web pages. They've slipped down between the archive minutes, newspaper clippings, and old photographs. The kind of lives rarely represented in the biography shelves of libraries and bookshops. The lives I wanted my book to be about. And I think that's a lovely way. He's expressed it much better than I can.
You can tell as well, there's great humility in you, which I'm really admiring here, because you can tell that he owes some of what he's crafted and given birth to the fact that you were his mentor. I love that.
Well, only a little bit, because I think he had lots of mentors. But yeah, but anyway, it's lovely that it's come out. And
yes.
And I teach, and life writing is something that I've been teaching now for 10 years.
You're a fellow at the Bristol University doing that, aren't you?
No, I'm actually I'm a writing fellow at Bristol University
Yeah.
for the Royal Literary Fund. And what that means is I'm a kind of essay doctor. So it's actually not to do with creative writing. People come along with essays about fish farming or engineering or some entrepreneurial something or the other. And I don't.
But again, coming round to you being a story engineer, it's just a lovely, and then the story engineering that happens in your songs as well is just, again, it is all coming clear as to your journey to now. It's lovely.
Yeah, thank you. So that's number one. So that was a kind of gateway into life writing. I'm going to talk about my children actually, because my children inspire me. That my daughter is now 25, and my son is 21, and they are inspirational. My daughter has become a musician herself. She learnt to play the drums I think it was about this time of year in 2017. I took her and her friend into a studio in Waterloo to produce a demo of a song that they'd made together, with Poppy playing the drums and Yasmin singing and playing the electric guitar. And since then, they have become a band called Grandma's House, who now have management, and who released a single last week that was played on Radio 1 and twice on Six Music on the first day alone, and sort of has had thousands of views and listens within the first few days, which is amazing. And it's a real inspiration to sort of see them take up this idea and pursue it. And I absolutely love that. And I love the creativity that goes into this, because it's to do with the way they look, the way their videos are made, as well as the way they sound. And my son, also a musician, but before the pandemic struck, was in a band called Football FC, and they'd already played at a festival in Amsterdam, and they'd been all over the place and had a tour booked. And unfortunately, the pandemic came along, and they were kind of hotly tipped at the time. Unfortunately, now they've sort of fallen apart. But Fred has, in the meantime, decided that he wants to launch a new magazine. And while he's at university in Bristol, but he's learning. While that's going on, he and a group of friends are working office hours on a new magazine that brings together music and sport. And what's rather lovely about that is that I think I did give him music. I think music did come from me, because I had when I was living in Bristol, I had a studio and in my garden, and whenever they came to stay, we'd go down into the studio and make a noise. But sport comes, I think, from his stepfather, and sadly, Fred's stepfather died last year. But Kate remarried a wonderful man called John, who was a fantastic steadying presence in their lives. And was fanatical about sport, and so gave that to Fred. And so he's got these
hybrid, yes,
yeah. And so he's brought them together in this magazine that hopefully will emerge when we all emerge, and because it's a physical magazine, that's what they want to do.
So there's a sort of musician DNA in there, but also there is the storytelling. If you're doing a magazine, so there's quite a lot of your DNA that's prevalent within that new.
Well, he's a very good writer. He's better than I was at his age, for sure. Yeah,
lovely. A true font of joy and inspiration in children. Lovely.
And finally, I'm gonna mention my partner, Sarah. I now live in Cardiff with my partner, Sarah, who is the executive director of Samaritans Cymru. And so, as you can imagine, it's been a busy time this last year, and it's one of the, I think we've been really lucky in this lockdown, because we, so far, touch laminate, we haven't had COVID. both had a lot of work on. So we've been able to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
But we've had each other. And actually, I only moved here in 2017. And I have up until now spent most of my life, probably since 1986, either going off to work quite a long way away every day or moving around, so rarely spending any time in the same place. And so this last year has been a complete shift. And what's been extraordinary is that we have spent it together, and we are able to wander along the corridor and talk to each other because Sarah's working at home too. And we meet at the end of the day and we cook. We have tea together in the afternoon. And we wake up in the morning and we start talking, and we're still talking last thing at night. And it's amazing. It's inspirational. So, Sarah.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's lovely. She'll be proud of that too. Lovely. Yes, I'm just wanting to allow a bit of silence there because that was just a lovely tribute to Sarah. So we're still now on to two things that never fail. Squirrels to grab your attention.
Where does that come from? I love that. It makes me laugh every time I hear it.
Oh, it's from Up, the film Up, where there's a dog that just goes, and why I particularly resonate with it. When I first went to drama school, I was analogized to being like an untrained Labrador, where I'll come in, lick your face, do a poo in the corner, hump your leg, get distracted and leave the room. I won't do any of those things. But then when I saw the film Up, it's a beautiful animation. And there's just a dog that keeps going, squirrels, and then it's just constantly distracted. So... So I too have a chaotic, frenetic brain, which I relate to in your own description of your own mindscape. And so for me, it's things like table tennis tables that never fail to grab my attention. So anyway, what never fails to grab Paul Dodgson's attention?
Okay, well, I'm going to say Laura Marling as a gateway into music. And I say Laura Marling because she was the last person that we sort of saw live sitting here, because there was actually was a recording of a live stream that was broadcast a few weeks ago, and we sat on Sunday night and watched it. And I find her songs extraordinary. Actually, just the way the tuning she uses, the mystery of the words, the lyricism, and the melodies that you can't quite work out.
Just say her name again. She's a new discovery.
Laura Marling.
Laura Marling. So tell me a bit about her, because I'm ignorant on my part. But
I think she's 30 now, just about 30, and she is a singer-songwriter, primarily writing with an acoustic guitar, but experiments in all sorts of other areas. She kind of emerged around the time of people like Mumford and Sons, that sort of.
Okay.
It was a kind of gang of acoustic troubadours. But I would say she's the British Joni Mitchell. She's that.
Oh, and by the way, Joni Mitchell, your YouTube film of Poppy Song is in good company, because just to the right of your film on the timeline is Case of You by Joni Mitchell.
Really? Oh, nice.
So you're in good company.
So, and that takes me into music, and just the fact that I think music never fails to grab my attention, because it's a way of explaining the world that doesn't just use words, but uses I like songs which do have words, but it's a combination of music and words, and that is the most, for me, I listen and I understand things. There's this amazing description of, I think, one of Shostakovich's symphonies being played during the siege of Leningrad, and people sitting and listening to it and crying because they sort of understood the experience they were having through the music.
The conduit, yes.
And that's what pop music does for me. I sort of understand things that I can't express in words.
And indeed, the second part of your heading of your book is the transformational power of music. So I know that's, on the Road Not Taken, a memoir about the transformational power of music.
Mm. And what was interesting about the story, just to kind of add a bit of context, that in the book, I start to sing again, and I go through a journey of starting to perform and going off and performing in places all over the country and in Germany and various other places. And what I discover as I do it is that actually performing it isn't the same as watching it and experiencing it. And that actually when I'm performing it, I'm very much aware of everything that I can see and what you can't see when you're focused on the stage, which is, and people aren't as well behaved in gigs as they are in theatres. So, it was when I did play in theatres, and that was lovely because I had the lights on me and I couldn't actually see anything beyond the front row. But when I was playing in kind of pubs, you'd see people wandering around, having conversations, getting bored and wandering out, coming back in again. At festivals, people coming in with a tray of food, kind of doing a bit of a dance and then going off again. And, and all that sort of thing. And all of that's going on. And for me, I'm just hyper aware of everything.
What was the year of your rediscovery and reconnection to performing live? I'm thinking 2014, but maybe I've got that wrong.
2016.
2016. Uh-huh.
Yeah, 2016. Yeah. But sitting and listening to it and experiencing it is something that is still as exciting, particularly finding new music, I think. Finding new music, it's still as exciting to me as it was when I was 13 and 14 and first started discovering music.
And I feel moved to ask you, because of the Hamlet line, showing the mirror to nature, which of those refractions do you prefer? Do you prefer performing live and then everything you're hypersensitive and aware of? Or do you prefer watching if you had to choose? Or maybe you'd like both?
I like both. I like the performing. The performing is great. For me, it's like a drug. I talk about, at one point, I talk about playing a gig and realizing that I was on a high for the next 2 days. It's a sort of hyper vigilance, hyper awareness of everything. And it's quite a struggle. I have to practice really hard. Some people just play. And for me to be able to get to the standard where I can play for nearly 2 hours a night.
Yeah.
It's a lot of, I have to practice, probably for 2 hours every day.
Paul, it really does sound like a gift to yourself, the fact you've found it again and you've rediscovered it. And that's, it's in talking to you, I totally understand the extra depth, to the title of On the Road Not Taken. And then now you're back to you're back on the path, having gone on lots of desire lines.
It is interesting, and to some extent, the desire is fulfilled. Whether or not I will go out again, I don't know yet. I'll see what happens when everything opens.
On your website, there was a date being held, which is something like the 14th of March, but I didn't know whether that was a legacy date or was that.
Is that so? I must take that down. That was last year. So in fact, the story begins in Kent, in Hythe, in Kent, and I talk about my school friend Fred a lot in the book, who I reconnected with as an adult, having not seen him for 35 years. And we start playing again. And he came here and he stayed in this house and played on my record. We've played live together. And it was a wonderful thing. And we were going to go back to Kent and play in Hythe. And it was March the 14th last year. And it was an amazing night. A man, in fact, who happens to live next door to the care home where my mum lives, by strange coincidence, wrote to me when this story went out initially as a play on Radio 4. And he wrote to me because he heard the play and he liked it. And then he bought the book and he kept in touch with me. And it turned out he was living right next door to the care home where my mum is living. And he said, well, I'll promote a gig and you and Fred can come back and play. And we had this amazing night where my mum was going to come, some of my mum's friends who are still alive, some of my school friends, from when I was a teenager, had found out about it and they'd bought tickets and were coming along. And it was going to be this extraordinary night. And then on the Thursday, I was thinking, well, what are we going to do about this? There was no kind of guidance. And on the Thursday before, Boris made the speech, some of you are going to lose loved ones. And I thought, I then had to travel to Brighton to meet Fred to rehearse, Fred, my school friend, not my son, to rehearse.
I was going to ask, by the way, if your son's name was informed by your love way back when of Fred and your relationship.
It was, yes, it was.
By the way, not directly connected, but my son's called Stan because of my love of Stan Laurel. So I think now we have
similar resonances
of why we've derived our children's names. But
Yeah, and so I made the decision to pull out because I thought, there were a lot of older people coming, and there were people coming from London, and it was the 14th of March. There were still things going on that weekend, but I was
before.
Just
It's
before
coming
that.
up to an anniversary of that, isn't it? Obviously,
It is, and I think it was the right decision to not to do it, not to bring all those people together at that point.
And by the way, I would so nudge and encourage you to make sure that you make it happen. Because
I will. We will do it. We will go back and do it once we can.
And there's a lovely sort of psychology of influence called social proof. You're more likely to do it if you say it out loud. So can you say officially that you're going to do the gig, Paul?
Okay, Chris, we are going to go back and play in Hythe. And
what's Fred's full name? I know he's in the book.
His name is Fred Gregory Davis. And he's a natural musician. He's extraordinarily talented. He'll hear things and play along with them straight away. He can sort of play in any key, and is able to. And what he plays the mandolin actually on with the music, and he adds a texture to it. Because I tend to sort of I pick, but if I'm strumming, then I tend to be adding the kind of rhythmic energy to the songs.
Yes.
And then he adds a sort of texture, a delicate texture, which fuses together and makes it much better. And that, of course, is what happens when you collaborate.
I really do wonder what he'd say about you in the band too, because you strike me as being someone who's just a natural great enabler of others. So whether you're a producer, whether you're just enabling others to be fantastic when they stand up to do it. So I know also in your album, which I'll show to the screen there, which you're so kind to send me a copy of that too, Fire in the Darkness, and Fred's name's on the back as being the mandolin player. So it's a very lovely instrument, a mandolin too.
Yeah, it is a lovely thing, and it adds a kind of counterpoint. That's what he's able to do to the melody.
And I always love the idea of a mandolin, even though it's not directly connected to the speech. But another favourite prologue to get people to be clear is the Romeo and Juliet prologue, I think. And I always think of a mandolin in the background of that.
Yes.
So we've now got the two things that have shaped you. I think we've done that. Now grab your attention. And then now it's like one quirky or unusual fact about you we couldn't possibly know until you tell us.
Okay. I had my first lesson in childcare from the man who introduced the phrase "sex and drugs and rock and roll" into the world, Ian Dury. Yeah.
What? Wow! Your first lesson in childcare, did you say?
Yeah.
Wow! Because by the way, did you see Ian Dury with Ian Glenn when they were in Bristol doing a production of Road? A really beautiful...
Oh no, I didn't. I think that was before my time, actually. I think.
Anyway, sorry, that just triggered that memory because Ian Dury, I loved Ian Dury and the Blockheads and sex and drugs and rock and roll. Love that. So tell us the story of how did he give you a lesson in childcare?
So what happened was that Ian. And I was when I was a producer for Radio 4, one of the things I wanted to do was to try to bring more music onto the network, contemporary music, because at the time there was rather a dearth of it on Radio 4. And at this point, some performers like the Pet Shop Boys and Ian Dury, he was in his 50s, as was Neil Tennant from the Pet Shop Boys, people like that, who were intelligent, thinking people. And I thought they could. There are things they could be doing on Radio 4. They could be adding to the debate. And so Ian Dury was one of the people that I approached and started to do things with fairly regularly. Different programs, different things. And so we got to know each other through making programs. And the way it would happen is I would go up to his house in Hampstead and sit there in the afternoon, and we'd talk, and things would happen, and we would work it out, and then we'd meet in the studio to record it, and we had these rather lovely afternoons in the house. And he had recently remarried a much younger woman, and they had a child called Bill, and Bill was fairly sort of new in the world, and at that point, I just discovered that Kate was pregnant and with Poppy. And so I told him, and he said, well, he goes, do you know how to hold a baby? And I said, no idea. And he goes, well, you can learn now. And he passed me Bill. And he said, no, put your hand underneath. That's it. And you do this and you hold it like that. And so, so I learnt How to Hold a Baby from Ian Dury.
Billericay Dicky taught you to hold a baby. Also, the fact you lived in Hampstead, I would assume Billericay, but of course not.
No, that's right.
But how cool to say that you're a friend of Ian Dury. Fantastic.
Well, I don't know about a friend. We worked together, and I could phone him up. But and we could talk about things. And sadly, he died. He was 57 when he died. He died of lung cancer too. And so no more. But
are you connected to Bill still?
No, I'm not at all. I mean, I don't know what happened to Bill. His other son, Baxter Dury, who's a son from his previous marriage, is a fully fledged performer and I've seen him live, who is pretty amazing. And he's sort of taken on Ian Dury's style, but it's a very contemporary way of being. And it's really worth listening to Baxter Dury.
When you say he's a performer, you mean
he's a performer. He's a musician. Yeah.
Sorry, I was wondering which element of performance he'd gone into.
He's a musician and a songwriter, and with a unique style. I mean, if you listen to it, you would probably say there's Ian Dury in there somewhere, but you might not know it's
absolutely
his dad. But he has the voice, he has the presence. It's he's fantastic.
So, Paul Dodgson, we have successfully shaken your tree to see which apples fall out. That was beautiful. Now we stay in the clearing and we move away from the tree, and we're going to talk about alchemy and gold now. So when you are at purpose and in flow in your journey to now and what you're here to do, I've sometimes heard of it, by the way, in resonance with Brislington diamonds. It's called the diamonds beneath our feet.
Yes.
What is the alchemy and the gold that Paul Dodgson likes to bring to the world? What's your purpose?
Well, I think again, I will use the umbrella term story engineer. But I would say it's not any one thing, because there are moments, for example, when we recorded Poppy Song, I remember the moment when we recorded it live in one take, not just one take, we did it repeatedly, but we did it live together. And we sat down in the studio, which happens to be just across the road from here. And, we played it, and I remember the sound fusing, and it all feeling like one thing. So I didn't know where my playing stopped and his playing began. It felt like one sound, and that felt like purpose. That felt like an amazing thing at that moment. And then there are times when I'm writing and stuff surfaces, and you think, where has that come from? It might be words, or it might be lyrics, but it surfaces, and there's something wonderful about that. There's something alchemical about that moment.
Yes.
When you get yourself to a place where stuff comes unbidden. And then finally, I'd say when I've been running a life writing workshop with people, and we've started in the morning and we've been working through exercises, and then I've commissioned a piece of writing from everybody, and we sit round in the afternoon, and before everybody goes home, we listen to what people have written. And sitting there and listening to 10 extraordinary stories from people's lives is the most remarkable thing. And it feels like I've walked down a dark corridor and opened a door, and there's this amazing landscape beyond that suddenly everybody can see. And that's an amazing thing. And so that, I would say, that's those are the moments that of alchemy.
Alchemy, right there. What a beautiful interpretation of that question. Thank you. And now we arrive at the moment where I'm going to award you with a cake, Paul Dodgson, for blessing us with your presence here in the Good Listening To podcast clearing. And the cake is, again, a beautiful idea that's open to interpretation. It's going to be beautiful in what you reply with, is what I mean. It can be, your cherry on the cake can be the best piece of advice you've ever been given.
Yep.
It could be what notes you'd give to your younger self, or it could be a favorite inspirational quote that's always pulled you towards your future. Mm-hmm. Or, and we can go here as well, what would you like your legacy to be? So inspired by All the World's a Stage and all the men and women merely players, when all is said and done, how would you most like to be remembered? Again, it's deliberately open to interpretation and rich, therefore, but where would you like to take the awarding of Paul Dodgson with a cake?
Okay. I'm going to go back to Poppy Song, and I'm going to use a lyric, a line from the lyric there, which is, "Don't spend your life waiting for something to arrive. If I could tell you just one thing, it's to know that you're alive." And that's what I wrote for Poppy in that song. But I suppose I was also writing it to my younger self. And that's what I would want to pass out to anyone else.
Your beautiful book, On the Road Not Taken. Where can we find out specifically about this book, and anywhere else you'd like to point us to for Paul Dodgson on the internet? Okay, well,
the book is available through all good bookshops and internet. Obviously, there aren't any bookshops at the moment; they're open, but you can buy it through all of the bookshops, traditional bookshops, as well as the online retailers. If you want to listen to my music, go to Spotify. You can have a CD if you write to me, but it's all online in all the streaming services, which is where things seem to be these days, and on YouTube. And there is a website called ontheroadnottaken.co.uk that has a bit more stuff. But I'm not a great internet presence at the moment, I have to say. I'm not putting much stuff out there.
But you are a great presence, if I may say. Is there anything else, by the way, I don't always think to ask this question, but is there anything else you'd like to say to bring our conversation to a close?
No, I feel like I've come to the end. I suppose I think I've enjoyed talking to you very much, and I feel like we're there.
Me too. I was just really inquisitive to make sure I'd said enough about how brilliant I think the book is. But anyway, Paul Dodgson, thank you so much for. It's been a privilege, actually, gracing us with your presence here on the Good Listening To podcast. Thank you very much indeed. Good night.
You've been listening to the Good Listening To show here on UK Health Radio with me, Chris Grimes. Oh, it's my son.
If you've enjoyed the show, then please do tune in next week to listen to more stories from the clearing.
If you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, then please do so. There's also a dedicated Facebook group for the show too. You can contact me about the programme, or if you'd be interested in experiencing some personal impact coaching with me, care of my Level Up Your Impact programme, that's chris@secondcurve.uk. On Twitter and Instagram, it's
@thatChrisGrimes.
So until next time, from me, Chris Grimes, from UK Health Radio, and from Stan,
to your good health.
And goodbye.